Hello, and thank you for joining our Stream of Conscious ADHD podcast. I'm Heidi Fawcett, along with my sister Heather. We are Gen X in menopause and, surprise, newly diagnosed with ADHD. Since we found out about our ADHD during the pandemic, we have spent most weekends sitting in my backyard in Brooklyn with our champagne brunch discussing the impact, the reflections, the grief, the stories. Many adults are now finding they were never diagnosed, so we thought we would bring everyone into our backyard discovery sessions, hoping it will help. We laugh, we cry, we are stream of consciousness conversationalists. We hope you enjoy listening to our discovery and perhaps glean some comfort from it. Here we go, into the backyard.
Probably better to wear it, right? I am a serial fidgeter.
Yeah, aren't we all? Okay, say something.
Testing. Bam, chicka, bow, bow. Yeah, good go.
So, as I mentioned, we are not sticking to our backyard format. We are doing a series of interviews instead. And today, as I foreshadowed from the last episode, I am interviewing Rachel, who is my best friend, who we have mentioned on the podcast many times because she happens to have ADHD as well. Welcome, Rachel.
Womp, womp. Oh my goodness.
This is one podcast you don't want to be on because that means you have ADHD.
This is so funny. Well, first of all, I'm very excited to be doing this with you because we've talked about it and I have not partook in the afternoon barbecue sessions, but I am very excited to be able to actually have these conversations. But also funny, I was just tweeting about the fact that we're actually able to make this happen as two ADHD people organizing something. It's a miracle in its own right.
Good. Well, yes, and as people have listened before, Heather and I go off on tangents about the birds or the squirrels or potted plants, snails, you name it.
That's so good.
I think that just is kind of the point of the whole thing.
Yep.
That we're not alone.
Yep.
We all do these little idiosyncratic things. But what I wanted to find out from you is, first of all, and I don't actually even know the answer to this, which I was like, how do I know the answer to this? So when did you find out you had ADHD? And how?
Technically, it was, I'd kind of always, we've talked about it for years. I think like just in my family, it's been a common conversation because I have a younger cousin who has ADHD and is on the spectrum. And so a lot of other family members, like my mom and my aunt and my brother, have all kind of assumed that a lot of us also have it too. So it's been a part of the conversation for a while, but it was actually when I got sober back in 2013 that I did like a triple hitter. So I got sober, I went to therapy, and then I went to see a psychiatrist. So I was like, may as well do it all. Let's get that brain taken care of.
Right.
And it was in therapy when I was talking about the fact that I was having a lot of anxiety and I was dealing with just the inability to be able to focus and just feeling out of sorts. It was like through that process of seeing a psychiatrist and addressing my anxiety and addressing depression and addressing all of the things that when you stop self-medicating with alcohol, you realize, wait, there's some stuff here that I obviously need to deal with. That was kind of the first step of that process, but it was like a secondary thing for me at the time because I was more focused on treating the anxiety that I was feeling having stopped drinking. So it wasn't really until probably the last couple of years where it's, I would say, gotten a little worse.
Mm.
And I think that's now knowing what I know from what you and Heather have talked about on the podcast, like coming to that age of like menopause and hormonal changes and hormonal imbalance, that you start to really see those symptoms. So yeah, it's a journey.
And actually, so in this list of the comorbidities I put together, there's a crap ton of them. But so they're all, learning disabilities, behavioral, neurological, what have you. And then under other is alcohol or substance abuse. So do you think that is to try and help them masking? Oh, and you know what? I just wanted to read this to listeners about comorbidities, which we talk about how it's a condition that exists, two conditions existing together. But I read something interesting in the National Institute of Health on their site or something. They were talking about comorbidities and that sometimes the condition is secondary to ADHD, meaning that they are caused by the frustration of coping with ADHD's symptoms. But when you started drinking, you didn't know you had ADHD, right?
I think in hindsight now, you can see things like at the time, absolutely not. Because I started drinking probably alcoholically at 17. And I think at 17, you don't know. I'm trying to think of an expression better than your ass from your elbow. Um, I can't think of anything podcast appropriate.
Okay.
But like, at 17, you're in that coming of age, you're dealing with adolescence, you're dealing with, again, hormone changes, you're finding your way in the world. And I just left home and there was so many other things at play that I don't think I would have had the capacity to even understand or recognize that I was masking something with alcohol. But I have no doubt that I had the symptoms before I fell into that path of addiction.
So did you ever try and label like why that you had this addiction, or did you think it was because you were,
British?
I was gonna say, a lesbian? Oh, well,
Oh my God, that's so funny.
if people weren't your family wasn't accepting of it at first, and so I was thinking maybe that caused you to.
I think a whole combination of things like 17, not being accepted for your sexuality, not even really fully evolved in whether my coming out was, I didn't want to say the right thing, but I was outed, I didn't come out.
Oh yeah.
So I was still on that journey myself. There's just a lot of confusion at 17. And I think being thrust into an environment where I was with a lot of other young people that were also reconciling with coming out of the closet, and we found like a little safe haven in a group of friends that we had. And where did we unite? We united in pubs and bars and restaurants. And so what were we doing? Well, we were 17 and we were
That's what you do.
drinking. So, it was England, the legal drinking age is 18. So that was kind of our solace. And so I think alcohol just was, at that time, it was fun. It was hedonistic. It was good times with friends. It was meeting new people. And I didn't think of it as a problem probably until I was in my very late 20s. I mean, it caused tremendous problems for me throughout that time, but I've never ever thought, oh, it's alcohol.
But when you realized and you did quit and started AA and all that, did you then see that was possibly a reason that you to cover up or to not necessarily cover up, but to cope with?
Yeah, I mean, I guess. And I think when you hear people talk about arrested development, I think that strikes a nerve with me because I think whatever happened at 17 for me, which is really when, like I said, when I started to drink alcoholically, I think whatever emotional evolution or emotional maturity or pathway I was on at that time came to a screeching halt. And I think that I was a 17-year-old navigating adult life until probably a couple of years into sobriety.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
I still think I am in many ways. Like if I'm left to my own devices, if I'm not doing the things that I'm supposed to do in recovery, I think that I am still that 17-year-old.
interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Well, and that is the thing. There are so many reasons and so many layers, as Heather calls it, a pylon.
Yep.
Because as human beings in the world we're in, and just all the things, it's no wonder that not everyone is
Right. It's a lot. It's on the face of just experiencing life. The things that a human goes through on the daily basis is hard enough.
Yeah.
But then you add these kind of nuanced layers, and then you look at things like ancestral trauma, which obviously is, there's so much
Yeah.
that we don't know.
Yeah.
The fact that we as women carry the trauma of our grandmothers based on the fact that we were biologically a part of our mother while our grandmother was carrying her. That's such a mind bend when you
Yeah.
think about, just for me, I know my grandparents lived through the Blitz and the bombing of my entire city of Liverpool during the Second World War. That has to have some bearing on a cellular level. You add all that, and then for me, it's been OCD, it's been ADHD, it's been depression, it's been anxiety, it's addiction,
There's a lot.
it's a lot.
And when you were the couple years into sobriety, when you felt like you were starting to grow emotionally, do you find that you have a hard time coping with certain aspects of your ADHD, or you don't attribute it to any specific thing?
I would
Thing.
say that there was a moment when I was on the subway and I was probably about a year sober, and there was a mother and two children that got on the subway, and she was like holding the baby, trying to wrangle this toddler, and she just looked totally defeated. And out of nowhere, I just burst into tears.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, what is happening? And I'm asking myself that question. I remember telling the story in therapy. I was like, I just felt so. And she was like, what does this mean? Give me an adjective, give me something. And I had no words to describe an emotion that I was feeling. I was like, I guess it was empathy. And honestly, it felt like I'd spent so much time in not feeling my emotions, not experiencing what was happening in my body because I drank all the time, that I was rediscovering all of those pieces and maturing at that time. But then with that came all of those lovely ADHD symptoms. Because once you're back in your body after not numbing your body,
Right.
it's
You
like,
get new
well,
faced with it.
here's a new circus. So that was fun, but it's definitely better than the alternative.
Yes. And it's good that you got to a point in your life where you said, okay, enough, I've got to get sober. And I think it's difficult enough as an addiction, as a condition. And then you're uncovering all these other things that you now have to face. So what would you say are the things that get in your way versus the things that you use as your superpower, as they say?
Yeah, the superpower is definitely a thing. And it's funny because I think ADHD people gravitate towards other ADHD people as we're sitting doing this podcast together. No, but I think we've found each other in the wild, so to speak, without realizing. So I definitely know a lot of people who share similar, maybe slightly different superpowers, and it's seemingly because of ADHD. But I think the things that are difficult, that I can really struggle with, that paralysis of it's like a pendulum. It goes from one extreme to the other. It's like I can either be extremely hyper focused and do 6 weeks worth of work in 12 hours. But the opposite of that is I can have a day where I cannot even open my laptop.
Is that from overwhelm?
It could be a time when I feel good, I'm rested, I'm well fed, everything in the world looks rosy and happy, and I can just wake up and it's like, nope, not today. And even like we were talking before we got started with this, even something that on another normal day would be a relatively easy task for me or for anybody else is like rocket science. I had these new microphones and I couldn't figure out why I couldn't charge them with my Mac, even though it was probably something as simple as like having a dongle to attach to the Mac, because Macs are not always the best for ADHD people. But on any normal day, that would not be a problem. But those days where I wake up like that, everything is impossible.
Just from my own experience and then seeing this with Grace as well at times, one of your comorbidities is depression or anxiety. It's this vicious circle, because if you get into that mode of being depressed or anxious, I feel like it induces this feeling of overwhelm or shutting down. But it's so frustrating. And I know I'm skipping right over what I asked you, but the whole superpower thing, and like I was saying about Grace and I hear crickets, whereas you and Heather have the Google tabs which for those of you who don't know, what we refer to as Google tabs is when you have many tabs in your brain open like you would in a Google browser. And each of the 4 tabs, let's say, are doing different things and you're working on them in your head. And to me, I just don't understand that. I just can't. It's almost like you're a supercomputer to me. And I know you're not always working on things that are important or relevant or whatever, but I have watched you do a live broadcast while texting people and writing things out and speaking and actually paying attention to what the people are saying on this broadcast because you respond to them, you know what they just said. I would be like, I cannot write down and listen at the same time. I cannot text and listen at the same time. I don't understand how you do that, but I guess one is in one tab and the other is in the other tab.
Yeah. It's wild. And I only realized how insane it was when I started telling it you and Jen. And I think you and Jen have a very similar kind of executive function and ways of processing things. So the idea of that is so insane.
Yeah.
And I will even say there have been times where I've been doing a live broadcast. It's just me. I'm on video. I'm the one speaking. And I'm actually somewhere else doing another thing with a different part of my brain. And I've had to say to my brain, no, we're speaking live right now.
Look at this.
Bananas. And I've had to pull that part of my brain back and be like, no, we need to be fully here because we're talking to people on a video right now and they're expecting us to be fully here. That has happened to me more than it's happened to me in like giving a speech. It's happened to me like in those settings.
Well, if that happens to me, if I lose my train of thought because I'm in my brain doing something else, there's nothing coming out of my mouth. Like,
no, people would not know when it happens to me.
That's what I'm saying. That's what makes it so miraculous to me is because it's like you have 2 brains going at once. One is having this full on thought and conveying it in your British way. And then the other one is trying to talk itself down from not paying attention to the other thing.
Yeah.
That just blows my mind.
It blows my mind. And it's crazy because there are times where, just to give a visual, as I'm definitely somebody who could, now looking at kind of the trajectory of like my career, it makes a lot of sense why I've been all over the place because I could not have done a 9 to 5. I would have been bored to death doing the same thing over and over. But I'm always working on at least 5 to 6 different things. I might not be your conventional sitting at a desk typing on my computer because a lot of what I do is strategy. So at any given moment, there will be 5 or 6 open tabs, each for one of those projects in my brain. And each of those tabs will be at various points of development, strategy, ideation. And I will dip into those tabs, work on them respectively. And then when I'm ready to take an action on any of those, I'll go to my computer. And that's all happening sometimes at one time, in one moment.
Oh my God.
It's exhausting.
I'm sure it is. I want to categorize, which I shouldn't do, people in 2 different ADHD worlds. One is the Google tab world and one is the Cricket world. And I think Bill Gates and all of the entrepreneurs that end up being ADHDers a lot because they are able to do that.
Right.
And so that to me, like the superpower. What I'm struggling with is with the Cricket people, where's our superpower? We just get, I mean, we can get hyper focused for sure, but it doesn't.
But I think that's a beautiful thing to be able to have this space in between because I feel like when there's so much noise in your brain, the level of tiredness, like your brain never really gets true rest. The only time I think I've ever get true rest is when I read, and it's got to be something that's not like stimulating to the learning part of my brain. Like I'm reading a James Patterson murder mystery right now, something that I can just follow a plot, or when I make art. Those are the only times where there's not other things trying to come in to busy the brain. I think what you're saying is kind of a superpower because you're giving yourself those valleys in between those moments of creation, ideation, busyness. You're giving yourself pause.
Yeah, I suppose there's something to be said for that because I don't know what it would be like to have my brain going all the time.
Our reason for this podcast is to support and uplift women in recognizing the impact undiagnosed ADHD has on their lives and to know that they're not alone. Discovery and grieving for what life could have been if we had only known and had help can be hard sometimes. If you have any thoughts you would like to share, you can email us at genx.adhd.sisters@gmail.com. Thank you for listening. #GenX ADHD Sisters.